think Coleman Young ever met W.P. Kinsella, but they had a lot in common. A few years before Kinsella wrote Shoeless Joe, the book that became the movie Field of Dreams, Mayor Young looked at an empty plot of land along the Detroit River and said, if you build it, they will come.
I know that the Tigers need new or modernized facilities. You can look at that stadium and see that. I know that the Wings are in that same position.
The year was 1977, and the mayor, known as much for profanity as profundity, had already watched the Detroit Pistons and Detroit Lions bolt for the suburbs.
In the 70s, this is when all kinds of institutions are moving out of the city. And he said, we got to stop it, and this is where we're going to stop it.
Young was wrapping up his first term when yet another iconic franchise announced plans to move.
Red Wings were owned by the Norris family, and they had actually signed a contract to move to a new stadium that was going to be built out next to the Silverdome. They were going to call it Olympia 2.
Young wasn't much of a hockey fan, but that didn't stop him from sending backhoes to the Detroit riverfront.
The arena will produce for Detroit whether or not those two teams are a part of it.
Longtime mayoral press secretary Bob Berg says the move was so bold it alarmed Young's closest advisors.
And they start saying, well, Mr. Mayor, how can you start to build something when you don't have the financing, and you don't have the architectural plans or a contract? And he finally said, I've got $5 million Jimmy Carter dollars, and if nothing else, we're going to dig the deepest effing hole in the state of Michigan. Now either get on board or get out of the way.
Opponents took note, too. After all, it's tough to miss a massive pit in the middle of your city, and they jumped on the mayor's gambit.
Because at the time, Ernie Brown, who was the council president and who was running against him, was really riding that pretty hard. This is irresponsible, it's a waste of money, you shouldn't be doing this.
A survey suggested Young was spending a lot of political capital along with all that Jimmy Carter money.
They'd gotten the first poll back, and Bob Millender told him, this is really hurting us. This could cost us the election. So Bill goes in to tell the mayor about the poll, and the mayor says, well, what do you think? Should we be doing this? And Bill says, well, yeah, we got to keep the Red Wings. The mayor says, well, then F the poll. We're going to do it.
The rest of the story you already know. Young was reelected, and Joe Louis Arena rose along the riverfront. An expert looked at the vertigo-inducing steps and said it was poorly designed. Critics said the team got a free building with a sweetheart lease. But the Red Wings stayed and raised 4 Stanley Cup banners right here in the heart of Detroit. And if he'd been wrong, they'd have buried him in that hole.
Right.
Coleman Young died in November of 1997, 5 months after the Wings won their first Stanley Cup since moving into the Joe. But Berg says if Young was alive today, he wouldn't lay in front of the bulldozers that someday soon may demolish the building on which his honor staked his career.
He'd say this facility served its purpose, kept the Red Wings, stopped the bleeding, and now we're back. We've got, next year we'll have all 4 of our pro franchises back in the city.
Taking one last stroll at the Joe, ML Elric, Fox 2 News.